I'm Chaplain Jacob Scot of the Oregon National Guard. This is the Hope in the Trenches podcast. Where going forward, I'll sit down for conversations with people who offer interesting and informative perspectives on finding strength for life and work in the trenches, and even improving our spiritual posture. Whether you feel like you're under heavy bombardment or ready to go over the top toward a new objective, it's good to be with you. Well, before we get started, I bent one of my rules today. We never wanted the Hope in the Trenches podcast to be just chaplains talking to other chaplains about chaplain stuff. But I think you're going to come to appreciate why our guest today is Chaplain Shane Yates. Chaplain Yates is a major in the Oregon Army National Guard. He became a chaplain in 2007 after a career in law enforcement. He's got a degree in comparative religions and a Master of Divinity from Faith International University in Tacoma, formerly Faith Evangelical Lutheran Seminary. He's held a variety of assignments as a chaplain to include serving units in the Cavalry, Infantry, Field Artillery, Engineers, and Aviation. He served at the battalion level, the brigade level, and now he's the Deputy State Chaplain working with me here at Joint Force Headquarters. Shane's deployed to Baghdad, Iraq, and Kabul, Afghanistan. He spent a year mobilized up at Joint Base Lewis McChord, supporting 2 brigades and serving as a chapel OIC. Shane is the CEO and co-founder of Task Force Heroes Ministries, a nonprofit ministry located in Bozeman, Montana that serves first responders and veterans nationwide, providing spiritual resiliency and hope as they face the dangers and trauma of their frontline careers. Shane and his wife Karen have been married for 30 years. They have 5 children and several grandchildren. Their oldest received a Purple Heart and is a retired E6 from the Army. They have a daughter who's married to a Marine, and they're at Camp Lejeune. He's got another daughter who works in law enforcement here in Oregon. Another son played football at Montana State University and is now an assistant construction superintendent. And their youngest son's in the Air Force right now, headed to his first duty station at Hickam Air Force Base in Hawaii. Shane, thanks so much for joining us today on Hope in the Trenches.
Oh, I appreciate it, sir. It's an honor and privilege to be here, and I look forward to our time on the podcast.
Yeah, well, it's always great to chat with you, and I've appreciated knowing you and serving alongside you for many years and working closely together with you now.
Oh, it's been fantastic. For those listeners out there, Chaplain Scot and I have had a wonderful time to get to know each other and serve together and even serve overseas together. And it's definitely a privilege for sure.
So Shane, there was a whole lot that we didn't cover in that brief bio. We could probably talk for hours just about what you did before you became a chaplain, but maybe tell us a little bit how you grew up or where you grew up and how you became a man of faith, or maybe share some details about that road that led to you becoming an Army chaplain.
Sure. So I grew up, predominantly spent my time growing up in Alaska, actually, Kodiak, Alaska, and grew up fishing, commercial fishing on boats, fished for salmon, did some salmon seining, also fished for halibut, did quite a few halibut openings, as well as some commercial herring fisheries as well. And loved it, miss it from time to time. I was able to go back there back in 2006 for my high school reunion and see some old friends, and had a wonderful time. My family got to go, which was great because they were always giving me a hard time about this Kodiak, Alaska stuff, and they actually got to see it firsthand. So it was awesome. As far as faith, I was born and raised Catholic for most of a good portion of my life anyway, and had kind of a faith change and went over to the Lutheran theology, and been, as far as theological worldview goes, I've been associated with the Lutheran Church now for many years. So that's kind of my journey. I will say that it hasn't been without its struggles, of course, and questions and tough times as well as celebrations, but it's been a very blessed journey for sure.
I'd probably look at you crossways if you said you never had any struggles or doubts or challenges.
Yeah, right. It has been a journey, and that's the awesome thing about our Lord is that none of us are perfect. We're all broken in some form or fashion, and thank God He is the perfect healer and the divine physician. That's for sure.
Well, I know coming from a very similar theological tradition too. Yeah, I understand where that hope comes from, and how you can live hopefully in a world that is full of brokenness and difficulties and suffering. And so we try to do our part to alleviate some of that. Because that's an interesting juxtaposition, your first career in law enforcement and then going to seminary and becoming a pastor and then an Army chaplain. How did you feel that tug or experience that call into vocational ministry?
It was a funny, I use the term funny. That's probably not the best word for it, but I guess interesting would be, it was an interesting feeling, if you will. And I really started feeling it early on. So I started in Los Angeles and worked, of course, in the jail system, and then worked South Central Los Angeles for quite a while there. And I started just noticing, and I was a Christian, I think at that point I could play a little bit of both sides of the fence, needing to be, at times you need to be tough and upfront and, very direct, and other times obviously show your empathy and your compassion. But I guess I just started noticing, that I was viewing people in a different light. And that was more of, it was almost like Christ was giving me His eyes to see His people. Almost looking at the population and the people that you'd come and encounter or come in contact with, regardless of their walk of life, regardless of the struggles, regardless of why you were there to contact them. But, I started seeing them more through the lens of the Lord. And it wasn't like I was forcing that or pushing that. I just started feeling a lot more empathetic and compassion. I knew God was doing something with my heart, and I just didn't know what. And so that journey continued on and continued on through my career. And as I got a little deeper into my career, probably around year 13, 14, I started really seeing it and feeling it, and started working more in the church and being more involved in my church and doing a lot of youth activities and Bible studies and all those kind of things. And that's really when I started feeling that calling, that kind of stirring in your heart, if you will, that really started to inspire me to seek God more on what is it that you have for me here, Lord? What are you doing? And so I went back to school and started finishing my degrees. And a buddy of mine, it's kind of an interesting story. A buddy of mine handed me a book called A Table in My Presence, written by a Navy chaplain assigned to the Marines, went into Iraq early on in the war. I think it was the first push, if I remember correctly. And he said, "Hey, Shane, I know you've been struggling with this calling." He was another Christian at work, and he said, "This might be a great thing for you. Maybe God's calling you into this type of ministry that would maybe fit your background." And it was, of course, the Army chaplaincy. And I had also had a family business on the side that we were running and helped supplement our income. But I read this book and I just thought, man, this really, Lord, what an amazing front row seat to see you work and to see you change lives. And of course, I took it to my wife, and my wife said, "What? You're going to deploy? You're going to do all this? No way. You're going to be gone." And I had told her, I said, "Just pray about it. Take your time, pray about it, and see what God does." And I remember a few weeks later, I got home and I went upstairs and she was upstairs, and she kind of gave me this look, which I hadn't seen a look like this in a long time, an emotional look. And she said, "Look, if God wants you downrange and He's calling you to go, I do not want to stand in the way of God's calling." And those were pretty much her exact words. And we had a great emotional moment there. And next thing you know, I was in the Guard and getting ready to deploy, and had finished up my law enforcement career and was moving on and finished seminary and got accessioned. And next thing you know, I was deployed. So it was a pretty amazing time frame, and a pretty amazing time in life, really. I remember, when I first got in, not knowing, and of course I was assigned to a Cav squadron right away, and I didn't know anything. I was raw, brand new, chaplain, brand new in the military, the whole deal. I could understand the paramilitary part of things, the discipline, the structure, all those kind of things. I was pretty dialed in with the physical fitness part. Not a problem, but I didn't understand some of the other things, that come along with field craft and that. And I remember being out in the field that first drill, and I remember it was probably 1 a.m, and some of the officers had told me, hey, we're the last ones to bed, right? I mean, let everybody else goes to bed. And of course, I didn't even know where bed was, and I went to the squadron commander, who's an awesome guy, fantastic officer. And he walks me to the edge of the tent, and he opens the door, and I look out, and all I see is glow sticks and in the darkness. And he says, I said, sir, where am I going to sleep? And he opens the tent. He says, hey, he said, just find a spot out there, Chaplain. So I said, okay, this is it, huh? And, my TA-50 was all messed up. It was too small and didn't fit me. And, being 6'5", 6'6", it was hard to squeeze into that sleeping bag. Stopped at about mid-chest, and it was about 17 degrees. And I walked over, and I saw a guy digging a hole. And I just remember this young enlisted guy said, oh, hey, Chaplain, how you doing? He says, just go ahead and throw some glow sticks out so you don't get run over during the night by Humvee. I was like, Roger, got it. And I remember laying there looking at the stars and thinking, okay, Lord, you called me to this. I know you're preparing me, and just be with me here, because this is kind of a wild. This is gonna be a wild trip, and it has been ever since. It's been super rewarding and just an awesome blessing. So
that's incredible, and well, you really kind of condense a lot into that brief timeline. Were there any particular mentors whether that was in law enforcement or in the ministry, that kind of came alongside you during that time?
Our former, there's two for sure at that time. And I'd say Chaplain Delbridge and Chaplain Thompson for sure.
Both great men.
Both great men. Fantastic, just awesome hearts. Truly care for the soldier at the lowest level of the organization, which is so important for us as chaplains to not overlook or forget all those youngsters that are out there embracing the suck factors and doing the job and making the machine work and run properly. And both those guys have unique talents, unique gifts that God's given them, and they really came alongside me and really helped answer a lot of questions and just, really supports that spiritual support, praying together and just hearing the event at times and just encouraging, both just such awesome encouragers. And that's such a huge part of what we do as chaplains. That encouragement piece it's so vital to our military ministry. It has to be a focus on what we do. And they did it, and they're awesome. And I still talk to them today. I just talked to Chaplain Thompson not too long ago, and he's doing fantastic. Retired now. Of course, he went on to be the state chaplain in Montana, and of course, Chaplain Delbridge also, as you know, recently retired. So it's hard to see him go, but they left a strong legacy for all of us here in Oregon. That's for sure.
Oh, and a great example of how they prepared the organization, and they prepared the chaplains that were coming up behind them to take over and assume that mantle. And everywhere, even today, everywhere I go, I run into people that know one or both of those men, both of those chaplains, and you can feel the goodwill that they created throughout the organization by the way that they worked.
Oh, 100%. I mean, we could talk for hours on different stories with those guys, but I can remember my first deployment, being in my chew, and 2 a.m, I'd hear this banging on my chew door. And usually when someone was banging on my door, especially during the middle of the night, it was not good. Whether it was wounded or a soldier needed some kind of care or some kind of crisis, and I'd open the door, it'd be Chaplain Thompson, and he'd be looking for a place to sleep because he'd been on a convoy and he wanted to go visit soldiers, and he was an 05. I mean, he didn't necessarily have to do that, but it was a part of his regular routine, that boots on ground ministry. And that was an example that I definitely wanted to follow and emulate. And I'd open that door at 2 a.m. Hey, Yates, you got a spot for me? And I had half the time be 2 a.m. We'd end up sitting up talking and just, fellowshipping. And it was always a joy. And, but yeah, for sure. You hit it right on the money there. They definitely left a legacy for, you can see it in the organization now.
Well, and what a great picture. This is not true just for chaplains either, but each of us in our callings in the military and outside the military, none of us is in this alone. And so it's so important to have someone that can come alongside us and walk through the challenges and the difficulties, share the hardships and the joys.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And and I think it's plaguing a lot of our veterans today is that feeling of that they're alone. I was excited to see that one of the themes today that we're going to get into here is hope. And that is, to have that hope. It's so important to know that you're not on this journey by yourself. And, and boy, we can certainly feel that way. Whether it's after deployment or other struggles in life, we can certainly feel that we are alone. And having that key core group around you to support you and to pray with you and to be with you and to lock arms with you. Obviously we all know that suicides are an issue in the military, and that is one of the things, one of the statements or slogans, if you will, for lack of a better term, that shoulder to shoulder that the Army put out is really captures it. Shoulder to shoulder with your battle buddies, with those you can trust, with those that are willing to listen to you, with those that are willing to lock arms with you, right, wrong, or indifferent, they're there with you. And that kind of takes care of that alone feeling and helps give us that hope that we need.
Certainly. And that's one of the key variables in suicide prevention. Now, we've been talking about resiliency a lot for 15 years or so now, and there is no one size fits all when it comes to resiliency. There is no magic formula for suicide prevention, but some of the materials I was just reviewing yesterday highlighted exactly that one thing that is sure is that connectedness helps in being connected to other people, being plugged into a purpose, something that's greater than yourself, and just getting that assurance that you're not alone.
100%. You said a key thing there, Chaplain, and that is staying connected and staying plugged in. So many veterans, including myself. I mean, after my last deployment to Afghanistan, that reintegration piece is very difficult, and you often feel alone. You often, feel like, man, the scenery's changed, my family has changed, my life has changed, and you feel alone, and you want to kind of become a recluse. You want to kind of separate yourself a little bit, even from your family and from society, and it's kind of going to this doing your own thing. It's so common, but boy, you got to stay plugged in, and you've got to stay connected to those that you trust, those that you love, and break down that barrier and break down that wall and fight through that, because it can be so detrimental to you. But you said it, staying plugged in is huge.
Why do you think we try to separate ourselves? I mean, I've seen this when I was on active duty. I noticed that as you'd move around from one installation to another, it was easy to connect with people in uniform because it wasn't hard to find people for whom you had like 1 degree of separation from someone else, or you've got common experiences. Maybe you went to the same military school at one point. Now we can compare deployments and realize, oh yeah, I was in country the same time you were. And so at least from one perspective, it can be very easy to quickly establish connection because we have all of those shared experiences, and because we wear the uniform and it says U.S. Army over our hearts, and we're tied into a bigger mission. So that it can be easy to very quickly establish connection with someone that you've never met before, too. You see that all the time, moving around in the Guard, like we alluded to before. You bounce around from one unit in the Oregon Guard to another, and you've got mutual acquaintances, mutual friends. You've been on similar deployments or exercises or annual trainings. all that stuff goes a long way to build connection. Yet at the same time, one of our defaults seems to be to withdraw when we're struggling or feeling maybe low or down.
I would agree, sir. I think as it relates to deployments, I think one of the things that happens to individuals is it's so swift. You become used to your environment. You figure out pretty much how to survive, how to operate in that environment, and it almost becomes comfortable. Mm-hmm. You get used to you're used to some of the weather patterns. You're used to the op tempo. You're used to no days off. You're used to kind of the grind, and you're being around you're around all your fellow soldiers that you're serving with, and there's a comfort level there. And then all of a sudden you are plucked out of that environment, immediately placed back in another one that has been moving on. When you left, it might have been 2014, and now it's 15. But you're kind of back in 14 still, but life has moved on with your family and with your friends back home. And so I think it's an emotional overload, and you're trying to sort through it all. And for most people, the way to sort through it is, okay, give me a moment. We always hear, just give me a second. And then the second turns into a minute, and then it turns into an hour, and then pretty soon it's months. And you're still kind of in this fog trying to figure it out. So I think it's emotional overload, and it just happens so fast. And I also think that human nature is that we can figure out on our own. We want to control things. We want to control everything, and we can fix it. Especially for most military people are type A, they can fix it on their own. And so they go into this self-preservation mode where we think we can just fix it and fix it quickly, and we've got it. We don't want to fail. Mm-hmm. And it's really not the answer. The answer is we need those around us. We need to be plugged in. We need to talk. We need to communicate. We can't do it alone, and the resources and those that love us are there for us. And so I think that's a part of it as well.
So it kind of sounds like too a lot of the prep work or preparation for resilience. Well, I mean, it happens before you need it, right? And so you build those relationships. You invest yourself in communities and become part of a community outside the military, so that when you've got that. It's kind of baked into who we are in the military, but then when you step away, you got to have something to step into.
Right. I mean, obviously, in an ideal scenario, I think we feel that we're pretty resilient. We've been through a lot as military people. I mean, I had worked in an area that had 66 to 68 homicides a year in about 5 square miles. And I thought, okay, I've seen a lot of things and been through quite a bit of stuff, and investigated traffic homicide stuff and all these things. But I'll tell you, when you're there, particularly for my job, just from my own experience as a chaplain, now you got a different role. You're there for your sheep, the sheep that God has given you to into your care, if you will. And so you got a whole different perspective and a different attitude towards it, and a different love that God has given you for these folks. And I think that I thought I was even more resilient than I probably was. And so, I think the only way to combat that return, maybe lack of resiliency or struggle with some of your resiliency, is to plug into resiliency, to plug into those classes, to reach out for that help, to better understand each of the pillars of resiliency, to focus on hope and not be that recluse, if you will, not, hide yourself from everyone else and not try to fix it on your own. I think those are huge keys that we have to focus on for sure.
And that's something that's never done, is it? Well, whether you're talking physical fitness or spiritual fitness, just resiliency in general, it's not something that you're ever done with. It requires kind of maintenance and upkeep. And, like physical fitness, you can get in shape, but if you stop when you're in shape, then very quickly those muscles atrophy. The strength that you had is diminished by neglect. Spiritual fitness, probably the same way.
100%. Yeah, That's a fantastic point. Is that just like your physical fitness can diminish, so can your spiritual fitness. And you need to stay in the Word. You need to stay strong, and you need to stay around those folks and those people that are going to encourage you and motivate you and support you, and not tear you down. And those things are key. But we get into that rhythm sometimes where we'll hustle, we get in shape, and we're dialed in both spiritually and physically, and we feel like we've got an adequate level in each one of these pillars, and then something comes up, or we allow something else to creep into our life, so we pick up some poor habits, and then we go down, and then we're back up, and we're on this cycle. Finding that steady flow, that running the good race flow, is key for success in all the areas of our 5 pillars.
And you've got to be willing to adapt and make adjustments over time too. I was just talking this week with one of my soldiers with whom I deployed to Afghanistan, same time frame that we were there in 14, 15. And he observed that he was getting older and was asking questions about, it was one of those general questions out on social media. How do you stay in shape as you get older? And a few of us chimed in and said, well, look, you've got to kind of move the goalposts a little bit, and kind of you got to change your goals. And there's probably no need to be able to bench 300 pounds anymore when you're 45 years old. But staying in shape and staying fit is important. And what you absolutely can't do is stop moving. And just because something hurts, you can't just take 2 weeks or 3 weeks or a month off, because something's always going to hurt. And so you've just got to adapt and adjust and be willing to change the plan of what you were going to do that day, just so that you can move and do something, and pay attention to those other areas that maybe you could get by with a poor diet when you're 20, but when you're 40, you got to pay a little bit more attention to what you're eating and what you're not eating and things like that too.
Well, I think that's absolutely true. And I just spoke to, I won't use his name necessarily, but a good friend of mine. He's a missionary for Family Life, the organization started by Dennis and Barbara Rainey out of Little Rock. And they work on strengthening marriages with the biblical principles and a biblical foundation. And he was telling me a story about a bike ride that him and his wife, big time, they're just awesome couple, love the Lord, fantastic people. And they would do these long bike rides, and he went on a 111-mile bike ride, and his wife had suffered a heat stroke, and so the doctor had told him, "Hey, man, you gotta slow down." And this guy's in fantastic shape. He looks 40, 60, but he looks about 35 or 40, and he said, you kind of ruined your pistons here, and you got to start thinking about your body and where you're at physically. And again, I think that matches up with what you're saying with the goalposts. We have to, it's almost like the SMART principle, right? The specific, measurable, action-oriented, realistic, and time-oriented. And that is, does it fit the R? Is it realistic for us, these goals that we have, and kind of changing the goalposts a little bit, and maybe making it a little wider as you get a little older,
And there is a lot of overlap between all of those areas, but they kind of all take particular attention at different times. Whether you're talking about your spiritual fitness, or your physical fitness, or your marriage and the relationships that will help you kind of be strong and endure and tackle whatever comes up. Can you talk a little bit about how you practice resiliency, and what types of spiritual fitness routines do you have that help you stay sharp, not just as a pastor or a chaplain? Because I think, well, just kind of tangentially, it's easy for us to make that mistake, to think about how in our normal day-to-day work, we're doing stuff in the spirit that have spiritual import. We're studying scriptures, we're engaging in prayer, meditation, other practices, but we're doing that in order to give that to others, to share that with others. it's easy for us to then actually neglect our own spiritual health in the process of taking care of others. So how does Shane Yates try to stay sharp spiritually, physically, mentally, in your marriage and your other family relationships, things like that?
Well, first of all, I think staying plugged in is huge, and that is plugged into the Word is hugely important. Being in that Word, reading different books. I know we're going to talk a little bit about that here in a little bit, but staying plugged into that church family and that church group is huge. For me, I feel like my cup runneth over, if you will, when I'm around and serving those people God's called me to serve. It's like eating a steak, whether it's the soldiers, whether it's the first responders, the veterans up in Montana, or from around the country that we bring in. That time with them and sharing, not only your experiences, but sharing the Word with them, sharing hope with them, hearing their stories and their struggles in an intimate and private environment that's just so beautiful up there. Boy, I'll tell you, that fills my spiritual fitness cup, if you will, like crazy. But definitely, as far as tangible things, staying in the Word, staying consistent in your reading of the Word, and your prayer life is another huge one for me, for my spiritual fitness, and that is consistently in prayer. I think oftentimes people think, well, I have to have this big, plan to go and pray for an hour or pray for 2 hours or whatever it is. You don't necessarily need it. You start the day off with a 15-second, 30-second prayer, and you roll. And then throughout the day, you're praying. And then maybe you have your alone time with the Lord at night, or maybe it's early in the morning over a cup of coffee. Getting in that battle rhythm will definitely fill your spiritual fitness cup for sure. And then again, I think also being around those folks, and we talked about it earlier, that will continue to support you spiritually, that maybe you're equally yoked with, that you have a similar theological worldview, and you're uplifting and encouraging one another is so vital, whether that's your family, whether it's close friends, could even be your kids as well. Those folks you got to keep them close. And I have conversations constantly with guys I've deployed with, law enforcement people that I've served with, and making those frequent calls and checking in with people and having those spiritual discussions. What are you struggling with? What's going on? Having that trust as well to be able to share. Those are all keys and elements that really fill that spiritual fitness cup.
You've touched on that a couple times over the last several minutes, just how important it is to surround ourselves with people who are interested in our well-being. Now that's a two-way street, right? Because
100%.
we need to invest ourselves in the people around us, and we should be focused on making life better for the people around us and helping the people that are kind of part of our circles. But who's in that circle is super important. It sounds kind of cliche, but there's that saying that you are the average of the 5 people that you spend the most time with. And that is to say that, right? Am I surrounding myself with people who are going to make me better or bring me down? Are the choices of the people that are kind of in my circles, are they going to help us move the ball forward together? Am I going to be sharper? Am I going to be smarter, more physically fit, or have a better spiritual orientation because of the people that I'm around? Or are they going to get me in trouble? Or are they going to kind of encourage me to make bad choices?
Right. No, I completely agree. For sure, a two-way street. And, but those people, choosing those people wisely, I like to say this sometimes when we're up in Montana and we're in a peer-to-peer group and we're talking through stuff, is that, you wouldn't want to hang around people, even if you loved them. You wouldn't want to hang around people that had the flu or they were sick all the time, because you wouldn't want to get sick. But yet sometimes we put ourselves in positions where we're around people that might end up making us sick in different ways. Maybe it's not physically sick. And so think choosing those people, and I think too, God brings those people into your life and plays a big role in choosing those people appropriately. Those people that are healthy, those people that are encouraging, those people that truly care, and that are also going to challenge you and hold you accountable as well. I think that defines it pretty well spot on.
And you've touched on this a couple times. Also, it can be really hard to build and nourish friendships when we move a lot from one city to the next, from one state to the next, from one job to another. Or in the Guard, we may deploy with someone. We might not work with them again for 2-3 years, if ever. But you've touched on this also a couple times. You've talked about just sometimes it's just that quick text message or a phone call. Someone comes to mind. God places that person on your heart, and so you reach out, just say, "Hey, man, I was thinking about you. How are you?" Expressing gratitude for the people that are around you. That's one thing I think you're pretty gifted at, is staying connected to people, because that's hard in this world. Well, and you've moved around a lot too, and so that takes some intentional effort, doesn't it, to stay connected to those people?
Oh, very much so. And I mean, obviously, I think I could probably, like many things in our lives, work on and get better at. And I think God's constantly molding and shaping us and growing us and nurturing us. And but it is extremely important to stay in touch with those folks. And you're right, it could be just a quick text. "Hey, I've been thinking about you. Hope you're doing well." Our schedules get busy and we are running kind of all over the place at times, but taking that moment to stay in touch with folks is really, really, really key.
Yeah, and it's been, I think that problem's only been exacerbated maybe over the last couple of years. We've used this adjective unprecedented a lot to describe the pandemic and how our communities and even the world have responded to COVID. And now, certainly, there's a lot of stress that creates when you can't do the things that you're used to doing, when your routines are interrupted or disrupted. So we probably have to think about that and again, just be a little bit more deliberate about nurturing those relationships.
Absolutely. The COVID hit and caused obviously some worldwide problems, let alone in our own communities. But it's important. You got to stay in touch. You got to stay in touch with these folks and make it a point to reach out and see how they're doing. And again, whether it's text or phone call or gathering in a safe environment, if you have to, then that's what you need to do. And I think for us as chaplains and pastors, you never know who God's going to throw into this flock that He's given you to care for. And I think in a lot of ways, we look at all people as a part of our flock and loving on all people and connecting with people. And it's just so key to what we do. I know in a little bit, we're going to talk about this current book I'm reading, and boy, he talks about the role of a shepherd, and the way William Barclay describes it is just so key. And I know we'll get into that here in a minute, but.
Well, yeah, since you brought it up, because I like to use that phrase too, that leaders are readers. And so I'm always curious as to what people are reading, whether that's in their field, in their profession, or trying to read more broadly. Tell us about that Barclay book that you've been reading.
Yeah, so I try to stay pretty read up. I mean, like most people, we get busy and we get tied up. And after finishing ILE, I kind of needed to take a break from reading. But I started this book, and I'd actually read this book, during seminary. So it's been quite a while ago, probably 16, 17 years. But it's one of my favorites. And William Barclay is a Scottish theologian. I think he's one of the best, although I don't agree, obviously, with all of his theological worldviews. He's solid, and his research is solid, scripturally based, and the way he describes things. So this book is called Jesus as They Saw Him, and he has a lot of writings if you Google him. And one of my favorite things in this book is when he starts talking and describing the shepherd. And when I went into this thing to be a chaplain, this ministry as a chaplain, he describes his book like this, and I think it just aligns so well with what we do. He says, the shepherd lived in the wide open spaces beneath the silent stars at night, close to the elements, in the midst of life and death and birth and peril. And therefore, inevitably, the shepherd lived close to God. The awareness of God was never far away. And he goes on to talk about, in Palestine, how the shepherds would operate. They would go before their sheep and making sure, leading them through narrow and dark defiles, which were excellent lurking places for wild beasts and for thieves and robbers. But they would go forth and make sure the path was safe. And then, there's so many references to scripture in here with what he's saying. The sheep, says Jesus, hear and recognize, and they know the voice of their shepherd. That comes out of John 10, that each shepherd had a particular call or cry to gather a sheep. And so there's so many things we can gather from them, from what he's saying here. That love that God gives you for your people, that love that he gives you for those around you, only comes from God. We can't muster it up. Mm-hmm. We can't do it justice. It's a calling that God lays on your life and in your heart, and that is to love people unconditionally with that agape style love, if you will. And so when I think about what we do as chaplains and even as people, particularly what he said in the first part about how these shepherds would be out there amongst the stars and, in perilous situations at times and in comfortable and calm situations at times. It reminds me a lot of the chaplaincy, and so important for you to be out there with your brave men and women of the armed forces, to be with them, boots on ground, and to spend time with them and walk with them as a part of being that shepherd. It's just so key. So there's many chapters in here that are just fantastic. He talks about the divine physician, and he talks about the bridegroom, the bread of life, the light of the world. And he really breaks it down from a perspective of some of these witnesses and some of these disciples' views of Christ and how they saw him, and ties into scripture. So a fantastic book. If anybody's out there that wants to have a good read, and it's not a difficult read, but boy, is it a heartwarming book that has plenty of scripture reference as well. So that's the one I'm currently reading now.
Those are some great pictures. And of course, coming from our faith tradition, we love people because we live in the confidence and know that we are loved. And it's so great too. I appreciate that you picked up a book that you read like 15, 16 years ago at seminary, because there's another saying that's out there that if you want a new idea, read an old book.
Yeah, right.
And we do gain a lot by reading and rereading books to, again, toss out another cliche there, that if read a book once for information, read a book twice for transformation. That then once you kind of internalize some of that stuff.
That's excellent.
Now that picture of the shepherd, and as a chaplain as a shepherd, kind of the last thing I want to hit before I let you go, in your vocation now, or your civilian ministry vocation, you're the co-founder and executive director of a nonprofit called Task Force Heroes. And I know you served as a pastor for a time too before Task Force Heroes became your full-time civilian vocation. How did that project get started, and what are you doing now?
So we got started, we started kind of the talking phase and the development phase all the way back, probably a couple years after I got in the Army. So around 2009, right around my first tour, 2008, 2009, as a kind of an outreach ministry. And so at the same time, I'd had a church call and to be an associate pastor at a Lutheran church in Southern California. And we started the ministry at that point. We did not have any idea, of course, how the Lord was going to evolve this ministry and kind of grow this ministry, and that we would actually be doing first responders and veterans. And so it has been just a huge blessing. And so now we have grown into this place in Montana that's a lodge on an 80-acre ranch. And we teach, we don't want them just to have fun, right? We want them to, obviously we want them to have fun and enjoy their time, but we want to provide a serene, comfortable environment that's all peer-to-peer, small groups, to provide that intimacy in a beautiful place where they can think about who they are and what really is their purpose, and think about life kind of from an eternal perspective. And then also they'll enjoy fly fishing and, of course, archery and some other things that we have for them. But we want to dig into a few things. In addition to the pillars of resiliency, we want to explore their core, who they are as people, what makes them tick, if you will. What context are they in currently in their lives? Where are they in their communities and in their homes with their families? Their capabilities. What has God blessed them with? What are their God-given gifts and talents? And then, of course, their courage. And, of course, that's an easy one because they wouldn't usually be doing a frontline career type of job if they didn't have courage. And so we dig into all that, and at times it gets deep and emotional and heavy, and then we celebrate together and go out and catch fish. And it's just been a fantastic journey. We bring in law enforcement from all across the country, firemen from all across the country, and then, of course, veterans from all across the country. So it's been a fantastic, a real privilege, very humbling to see these folks show up there, knowing what they're getting into, and seeing what God does with them in a short period of time, 4 to 5 days. Just seeing the growth and them actually sitting down and catching their breath a little bit from the busyness of their schedules and the trauma that they're seeing, to actually think about their life away from work and away from the places that they work and some of the chaos that they may have been exposed to, and take a time to breathe deeply and think about life. And it has been very, very humbling, very, very exciting to see. And I'm honored to be a part of it and to see what God's done with it, growth wise. And I look at it every time and I tell these guys, you're not here by chance. I'm not a real coincidence guy. I think it was planned that you're here. And I tell them that, God has chosen you to be here for such a time as this. And, we have a great time together. It's been fantastic.
I think that's a great picture too, or I think we can see how you found something complementary in your civilian life between your vocation in ministry and in the military, and what you do outside the military, and finding that purpose and mission, something that can motivate you and pull you through and keep you tied to something that's important.
Absolutely, sir. It's been, like I said, it's been a very humbling journey, and we're setting up for another great season. We'll probably be full here within the next 2 weeks with folks coming from all across the country, and it's been fantastic. I know last year we had our first chaplain, kind of care for the caregiver group, our first group of chaplain organic, if you will, folks, and that was fantastic. So we've had everybody up there: LAPD, LA sheriffs, Huntington Beach, firemen from all over New York, Georgia. It's been a real blessing. So we're honored to be able to do it.
Well, blessings to you in the work you're doing there. Now, before we wrap up, Major Chris Klein, our great producer and public affairs officer. Chris, you've been listening to this conversation, and I know you've met Shane before, and he is as big as he says he is. Any questions come to mind?
Yeah. I was just looking through your bio, and I was on the 9/10 deployment as well. I was in Talil, not in Baghdad, but went up there a few times. Just thinking about that brought me back to, at that time, I was a company commander, and being a leader, especially infantry, there's problem children in our units that sometimes because they're not fitting into that square peg, they're the round one and it doesn't go in so easy. I just wanted to see, as a chaplain, and having to deal with this a lot, and either one of you can weigh in your thoughts. How do you, fight the process of like a empathy fatigue, or like having, people come to you time after time with problems, maybe similar, maybe, of their own doing, and how do you keep that from getting fatigued from it? It's kind of similar to, reading so much in ILE.
You want to go ahead first, Chaplain Scot?
Oh, I was going to pitch it to you, Shane, but
sure, yeah.
Well, maybe just briefly. So for me, it can kind of start to wear you out, but for so much of my career as a chaplain, I felt that I've got the best job in the Army, because I don't feel like I've even come close to giving to other people the love and the support and the encouragement and everything that I've received. So for all of those conversations that maybe are a little bit emotionally draining, or challenges or difficulties or problems that you're trying to help somebody work through, that they're really kind of weigh you down spiritually, it's the connectedness to the military, to the people around me, and even the people, maybe the soldier or the person right in front of me that I'm trying to help, that gives me so much too. Now, I think one of our guests a couple of months ago, Dr. Tom Plant, talked about this, that kind of one of the best ways to cope is to look outside yourself and to find ways to help others. And that's really such a powerful way to cope with any emotional or mental or spiritual challenges that we might be facing. So I just feel like I've received so much encouragement, support, and love from the people to my left and to my right, and more than I could have ever paid forward.
Yeah, I would agree 100%. I think that's a huge part of it. I also think, what I remind myself of is when I have, a young soldier or whatever that comes in and maybe they're consistently visiting you, and you have to be reminded, I think, and I think God plays a key in this too, that, you were called there for such a time as this, and that the Lord loves them just as much as he loves you.
Yes.
And for that moment, that young person, whatever issue it is, even if it's a continued same issue and you're starting to feel that compassion fatigue a little bit, but in their life, that issue is a huge deal to them. And that love that God gave you for that soldier, I think overcomes and kind of rejuvenates you and gets you back in the game to remember that these young people, they are making the sacrifice. They are here. They're not at home. They're not sitting at Starbucks drinking a latte and relaxing or sitting playing video games. They're making a sacrifice to be in this. Particularly, you were talking about downrange. They're here downrange. They're making a sacrifice. Their family loves them. Their family misses them. They're risking their life here too. I've got to give them everything I got, even when I felt like I didn't have anything left. And I think that's key too, is to ground yourself and remind yourself. Kind of go back to, hey, they're here to make a sacrifice. This is a huge deal to them. They're wearing the same uniform, and guess what? God loves them just as much as he loves you, and they're here for a reason, and you're here for a reason. And so that always kind of brought me back to where I needed to be, particularly with maybe those like you were describing that are consistent visitors or having consistent issues.
One of the last things you said there really resonated with me, and I was an officer in the Army before I became a chaplain, but it took me a while to learn that God loves the person in front of me just as much as he loves me. And so to see the people that I serve with through that lens, that everyone has value just for because they're alive. Because they're another human being, that they are worth our time and our effort. Even if sometimes it's hard, but yeah, that to look at others through that lens.
Thank you, gentlemen, for your insight. Appreciate that.
That's still hard. God bless all the company commanders. That's a rough job.
Yep, that's a tough job, and of course we love you guys and support you guys and pray for you as well. And for us, again, just to kind of recap that, it's when God sends you over and he says, "All right, Chaplain Yates, you've got this squadron, And guess what? You've got everything associated with this squadron, all the good things, all the not so good things, and all the folks that are here. This is my flock, and I'm entrusting you to bring, bring me to them, if you will. And so, unfortunately, we can't pick and choose who those folks are, and nor would we want to. We love them all the same, and give them everything we've got because we're working for the Lord, not for ourselves. And I think that's a good reminder as well, even when it gets hard.
Yeah, maybe just to put a bow on that, so often when we think of purpose or we think of what our mission in life is, we like to look toward the horizon. We look way ahead. What's something that's out there or something that's yet to come. But we can find so much purpose and meaning and value and mission right where we're at, right where we are now. Yeah, all we got to do is open our eyes. There's so many ways we can serve. Well, Shane, we need to wrap it up, but thank you so much for coming on today. And for our listeners, we hope that you'll start to hear Shane's voice a little more regularly on Hope in the Trenches as a co-host and as a host. But again, thank you, Shane. God bless you and your family in your work, and I'll look forward to crossing paths with you again soon.
Sounds good. I appreciate both of you, and blessings to you, and have a great rest of the day. Appreciate the time.
This podcast is produced by the Oregon National Guard Public Affairs Office. My prayer for you is that wherever you find yourself, that you might find hope for today and strength for the ambiguity and chaos of life. Blessings on the rest of your day.